This UCSD TV program is presented by University of California Television. Like what you learn? Visit our website or follow us on Facebook and Twitter to keep up with the latest programs. The Sam and Rose Stein Institute for Research on Aging is committed to advancing lifelong health and well-being through research, professional training, patient care, and community service. As a nonprofit organization at the University of California San Diego School of Medicine, our research and educational outreach activities are made possible by the generosity of private donors. It is our vision that successful aging will be an achievable goal for everyone. To learn more, please visit our website at aging.ucsd.edu.
Thank you everyone for coming out here this afternoon. I was especially pleased by that introduction because my wife is in the audience, so it was just perfectly done. I'm going to speak about aging in the digital era, how new technologies can impact care. Just in the interest of full disclosure, you can't really do a talk on technology and aging without mentioning several different brands and companies, which I will over the course of my talk. And I have no financial relationships of any sort with any brands or companies that I will be mentioning. I do have a consulting arrangement with Apple Education, which is a branch of Apple Incorporated, on an ongoing research project that I'm going to be talking about later. And I will be presenting findings from research supported in part by the Stein Institute, the UCSD Resident Physician Council's iPad project, the John A. Hartford Foundation, and the NIH. So when one starts to talk about a topic like technology and aging, really, where do you begin? So let's begin with the very, very basics. What is technology? Technology is defined by the Collins English Dictionary as the application of practical sciences to industry or commerce, and the methods, theory, and practices governing such application. For example, a highly developed technology. A third definition that the dictionary lists is the total knowledge and skills available to any human society for industry, art, science, etc. As you might infer, this term then applies to whatever is used for this purpose throughout history. So technology can mean anything from a piece of flint used to knock together to create fire. It could be a piece of stone used to grind wheat. Or it could be the iPhones that most of you have in your pockets. So this doesn't really help, does it? Where do we really begin when discussing something of such breadth and depth as technology? The overall scope of this topic is well beyond the purview of a 1-hour lecture. It's probably beyond the purview of a couple of hundred such lectures. But in the interest of keeping it manageable, for tonight's talk, I'm going to discuss the meaning and role of technology in late life. I'm going to talk about aging, communication, technology, and social media, since that is so much the spirit of the time. I'm going to discuss the aging in place movement, smart homes, and senior design. And finally, I'm going to talk about healthcare interventions and research, focusing on some work that I've been personally involved with here at UCSD. So the meaning and role of technology in late life. I want to introduce you to the idea of gerontechnology, which is an interdisciplinary field of scientific research of technological applications that are directed towards the aspiration and opportunities for the older person. With the growth that we have in the older population, the technologists have specific focus on all of us. So what does gerontechnology consist of? This is also a broad term, but a little narrower than the terms I've used before. Broadly speaking, it can be classified into assistive technology, which is things like telehealth, or in-home monitors or sensors, or intervention devices that can be used to implement interventions primarily in a home-based environment. There is also information and communication technology, or ICT, and this includes the internet, smartphones, tablets, communication devices essentially, and largely a product of the last 20 years if you're being generous, 5 years if you're being restrictive. And finally, smart homes. And smart homes are integrated technology where you use several different types of devices, several different modes of technological intervention and design, but you use it for a single purpose, which is to create a home-based environment that is effectively smart, where the home does some of the work for the older person. And as you might infer, these are not clear-cut distinctions. A smartphone could be an ICT device, or it could be a piece of assistive technology if you use it to talk to your doctor. Or it could be a smart home device if you link it up to, say, a heart monitor. So there's a lot of fluidity for a specific type of technology or a gadget between these classifications. I also want to introduce to those that may not be familiar to a couple of terms that kind of get tossed around in the ether these days, cool terms, if you will. There is something now called Web 2.0, which is a term that refers to two major paradigm shifts in the nature of the internet. Web 1.0 was the old model of the internet where someone put up a website, it was on there, and anyone could go online and read what was on their website. But it was unidirectional communication. In other words, users were not able to interact with the website. They were only able to consume the information. More recently, though, there is the era of user-generated content, where someone could log on to a blog, read what the blogger has posted, and give your comments, give your feedback, effectively engage in a discussion. Or Facebook, where you log on to the website, and this is now a changing of the order where the website is dependent almost entirely on its users for the content. All they do is provide infrastructure for this. So this development of two-way communication between the internet and its users is one aspect of Web 2.0. And the second is cloud computing. So what is cloud computing? The old model of the internet was the web model, where effectively the internet consisted of multiple nodes that allowed one to communicate with millions and millions of other nodes, be they servers or be they computers by some other users that were also online at the same time. But under this model, one needed to go to a node or a terminal on the web in order to be online. This has now changed. The internet is now moving towards the cloud model, where there is a centralized space, virtual space of course, where all data is stored in such a manner that it can be accessed simultaneously and interactively through a computer, a desktop, tablets, phones, etc. There is constant flow of information, not just between terminals, but between the individual and the cloud. The cloud is what makes it possible, for example, for me 2 nights ago, to make 2 of my slides for this talk at home, then take a nap, wake up in the morning, make a 3rd slide on my iPad as I'm eating breakfast because I had a brilliant idea, then have a 2nd brilliant idea on my drive from home to my office, get off, immediately whip out my smartphone, create a slide walking from my car to my office, go back home, go back to my laptop that evening, and knock out another 4 slides. Except in the old model, I would have had 2 slides by the time I got back to my computer the next day. Thanks to the cloud, I had 8. This is the era we now live in. Constant access to information all the time, almost anywhere. Another cool term, if you will, the idea of the cyborg, which is high science fiction, if you will. If anyone watched the RoboCop film that came out 6 weeks ago, it was about a cyborg. Cyborg is short for cybernetic organism. What is cybernetics? Cybernetics is the study of control of human functions and how they can be taken over by machines to eliminate the human role. The cyborg is strictly, up to this point, the domain of science fiction, the Terminators, the RoboCops, etc. And if, for those that know the term, if I say, imagine a cyborg, you probably think of something that looks like this guy. Intimidating, machine parts sticking out, pretty strong, pretty imposing. and usually something that looks like something out of a super army. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not a cyborg. Read that definition again. The cyborgs are already among us. They're probably in this audience. If a cyborg is a creature where machines merge with human functions to create a being that can supersede the function of either, then most older adults now have hearing aids that accent the auditory ability. They have visual systems. I put the Google Glass in there as a picture just because I think that's cool. Many of us use actigraphs or exchangeable, removable devices to measure our foot counts. Some of us may have pacemakers that allow a heart that should not be functioning to keep going, or artificial hips that allow us to walk better than we would have otherwise, artificial knees that give us more mobility than anyone of a certain age should not reasonably expect anymore. And we won't even talk about the external devices. This is a walker, but we've seen some fairly sophisticated wheelchairs. If any of you has any of this or knows any of this, any people that have some of these devices implanted in them, essentially, we are cyborgs. Not so far-fetched and not so science fiction when you really think about it. On that note, then, aging, communication technology, and social media. Some call this the era of hyperconnectivity. We went from an era of isolation to an era of exploration, the time of Columbus, Cook, etc. Then we went to an era of interdependentness and interconnectivity when the trade routes started. Then there was the era of mobility, when there was free flow in the jet age of populations between continents. With the advent of the internet, we entered the era of connectivity. And some say that thanks to smartphones and the cloud, we now live in an era of hyperconnectivity. And hyperconnectivity is defined by not just person to person, but an equivalent amount of person to machine interaction. And the term is nebulous. It can refer to many things, including multiple means of communication like email, mobile phones, face-to-face contact, but also Web 2.0 services. In theory, it is now possible for one to create an identity that has absolutely nothing to do with one's own and live a practical virtual existence on the internet. You could create an email ID, you could change your gender, your age, you could change how you talk, you could be essentially a totally different entity. This is the era of hyperconnectivity where dual personalities is not necessarily a psychiatric diagnosis. And the trend in computer sciences now suggests that all things that can and should communicate through a network will effectively communicate through a network. We are hyperconnected. How do older adults get hyperconnected, and how is this different across populations? Traditionally, connections were through a classic desktop, but this has evolved, especially for older adults, through the Goldilocks model, if you will. Simply put, desktops are too bulky and importable for people that frequently have pain in their joints, frailty, balance issues. This is just not practical enough. Why would you walk up 2 flights of steps and log on through your terminal just to get to the internet? So then we got laptops. Laptops were better. They were portable. They were easier to carry around, but kind of complicated and heavy. Lugging around something that weighs 8 pounds in your hand or on your backpack, especially if you have osteoporosis, brings its own risks. For people that are younger, this problem was overcome pretty easily once the smartphone came around. Now suddenly you had a nice, clean interface, logos, touch screens. Everything was at your fingertips and in your pocket, literally. Older adults did not think so. These were too small. If you have motor insufficiency, if you have sensory deficits or visual deficits, it's kind of hard to look at that screen and even harder to type using the tips of your thumbs. So now the tablet. Bigger screen, easier logos, cleaner interfaces, and larger keyboards. Is it just right? We don't quite know yet, but we will find out. So what predicts higher internet use among older adults? Effectively, if this audience has made it out here on a Wednesday evening, finding out about this lecture, possibly through a newsletter or an email, then chances are I'm already preaching to the choir in some respects. Nonetheless, Those that study this think of predictors of higher internet use as having three distinct components. It could be related to physical capital. Studies have shown that better internet use is tied to better overall health, but also chronic control illnesses. And there's a little bit of a paradox in the first two. The reason chronic control illnesses is important is that studies have found that someone that has diabetes or hypertension or osteoporosis or any of the other chronic illnesses of old age, once they are controlled, tends to use the internet much more actively to find out information about preventative measures, keeping in touch with the latest research, trying to find out how to stay on top of their conditions rather than being overwhelmed by them. And then the intuitive associations, better instrumental activities of daily living, things like managing your money or keeping your appointments or your medications. Low vision impairment, which makes sense, and intact motor skills, which also makes sense. Then there is psychological capital. Higher psychological capital predicts higher internet use. What does this mean? Lower rates of anxiety, lower rates of depression, relatively intact cognitive ability. This stuff is not necessarily intuitive all the time. An active coping style in the face of stressors. There are personality differences between people that will turn to the internet, older folks that will turn to the internet. Easy usability, of course, which is why the tablet is much easier than a laptop. And also perceptions of the internet. Some people see the internet as an intimidating thing full of viruses and hackers or just complicated processes of getting online for reasons they can't fathom sometimes or don't consider important. On the other hand, other folks perceive the internet as an easy, friendly place, something that adds to them and adds to their lives. And this predicts higher internet use. And finally, social capital. The presence of a large social network and participation in multiple activities of different kinds has been shown to predict higher rates of internet use. Now, this is also associated to some extent with the availability of a younger, more familiar person that can walk them through any questions or challenges they might have. How do you set up a Gmail account? How do you set up a Facebook account? Once you have one, how do you update your status? What do I do about this advertiser that keeps coming up and annoys me? I have no idea how to fix it. There's a wide spectrum of internet usage among older adults. The most highly functional are effectively absolutely no different in how they use the internet than someone that's a 17-year-old. There are other people that don't want to be within 50 feet of a computer. High education predicts higher internet use, as does higher socioeconomic status. A lot of this equipment isn't especially cheap. There was a fascinating article I read, I believe it was in the New York Times last year, talking about the new generation of library design. And many of the old grand libraries are doing away with their book collections almost entirely and switching their primary reading rooms into an entirely cyber library, where instead of books and newspapers, there's just stations with iPads or computers where people can come in and read online. It makes sense if you think about it, especially in the tablet era where things are so much easier to operate and you have access to content at your fingertips that would involve 2 hours for an experienced librarian to locate in the past. Just the magnitude of the change is quite staggering. So what are the numbers? What's really going on? Who's using this stuff? How many people are using it? Who are they? So in a study conducted using data from the National Health and Aging Trend Study, or the NHATS, which was a representative population of Medicare beneficiaries. This was a study published last year where they tried to assess patterns and trends in communication technology use among older adults. And they found that 91% of all older adults had a working phone which was not a cell phone, a landline. Pretty high number, especially since there are children now in high school even that may never have operated a landline in their lives. 81% had a working cell phone, so the penetration of mobile phone technology is really almost as high as a landline. And this is significant. It shows that as the technology gets more pervasive, older adults are able to adapt to it. 67% had a working computer and knew how to use it. 2% had no computer at home, but had used one elsewhere. 44% had sent email or a text message in the past month. And 47%, almost half, use the internet for reasons other than texting or emailing. So half of the older adult population, as represented by Medicare beneficiaries in this sample, was quite sophisticated in how they use the internet. This is important because there is still some element of stigma to older adults and technology use. They're seen as not necessarily a market for the companies. They are seen as not necessarily proficient. In truth, nothing could be farther from reality. And this is all growing. Internet use among older adults. This is a different study using the same database in a different subpopulation from the same master sample. So effectively, we have two different studies that lend some validity to each other. In this one, 61% of adults aged 65 or older had some form of computer use, compared to 67% in the previous sample. And they found 57% of adults aged 65 and older went online with some regularity. 86% of these adults used email, 51% shopped or used the internet to pay their bills. 45% sought health information, a big number. As a clinician, I now find myself having to effectively Google myself once every 2 months, because I know that the first thing someone does after they get an appointment with me is to Google me and see what they find. It is in my interest to know what they know about me, because sometimes I'm not sure I know it myself. They also know about the latest trials. They know about the latest medications on the market. A lot of information now is put out in the public domain faster than it even enters the general media. A study comes out in a journal. The journal puts out a press release. The dissemination is so fast. Before the New York Times, which most medical practitioners rely on to keep their medical knowledge updated, gets a hold of it and publishes it, the patients already know. The medical profession is realizing this, and a lot of the continuing medical education process has to do with not just comprehensive consumption of data, but rapid consumption of it. Because our patients, and actually especially the older patients, are right on top of it. This has downsides, of course. There is an equal amount of misinformation out there. I love it when someone comes to me with misinformation, because then I have something on them. And no fewer than 45% of the older adults that went online actually used social networking. I have some numbers coming up, but this is just a phenomenal finding. They also found that there is an age effect to this. 32% of those between 65 and 74 use the internet for health information, compared to 14.5% of those aged 75 to 84. This is the baby boomer generation. These are folks that are much more tech and internet savvy, much better informed, and much more proactive in how they seek their healthcare. And this is being reflected. The scariest part about these statistics is this study was published in 2013, which means it was probably conducted in 2012. That's when they downloaded their data. For numbers that went in 2012, this almost predates the widespread use of tablets, which have sent internet use among older adults skyrocketing. In 6 months, these numbers may already be woefully out of date. And this is, if nothing else, a mirror of the times we live in. These are statistics for social media platforms and how frequently they're used among older adults. These are data from the Pew Research Institute. The first one, Facebook, is used by 45% of adults aged 65 and older, but compared to 84% in the 18 to 29 age group. These are in alphabetical order. Instagram, only 1% of adults aged 65 or older were regular Instagram users, compared to 37% in the 18 to 29 age group. Now, this is based on stratified surveys by the Pew Corporation. The third one, LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a professional networking website. LinkedIn, as a result, is by far the most commonly used social media platform among older adults, with numbers virtually identical to the 18 and 29 age group. Compare this 15% to the 84% of Facebook. This is Pinterest, which is a website that allows people to surf multiple places on the internet. And so you could click on it, and you could put a little virtual pin. Then you go back to Pinterest and you can get a list of all the places or all the websites that you've pinned. Growing quite rapidly in popularity, again, popular with older adults because it helps them organize some of the diversity and volume of information on the internet. And the last one, Twitter. Only 5% of older adults use Twitter compared to 31% in the 18 to 29 age group. So how does all of this stuff, which is cool and interesting, how does it translate into something tangible? How is it making a difference beyond making communication simpler? Is it actually impacting health? In this section, I'm going to talk about the aging in place movement. I'm also going to talk about smart homes and senior-friendly design. So what is aging in place? Some of us may have heard this term. It's essentially an umbrella term for a collective effort by policymakers, researchers, care providers, and stakeholders to create communities that facilitate the widely recognized preference by a majority of older adults to remain in their homes and communities as long as possible. Several different types of research looking at outcomes in everything from dementia to hip fractures have shown that by and large people prefer to live at home and they prefer to age at home in a familiar environment. And this is intuitive. Who would want to give up their autonomy and a familiar environment to move to some place that's unfamiliar, controlled, and regulated, if you will? And to help with the aging in place movement, people have identified a major role for assistive technology, what is assistive technology? It's broadly understood as computer-based tools designed for different purposes to help maintain and prolong older adults' independence, to stimulate mental agility, to reduce a sense of isolation, and to increase a sense of security and welfare. A broad term. And in fact, the scope of assistive technology is every bit as broad. It may include behavior monitoring tools, telehealth tools, and smart home tools. A lot of research has gone into identifying what determines the success of assisted technology. 4 primary factors. The extent of one's disabilities. The more relatively less impactful they are, the less disabling they are, the better the chances for assistive technology to provide a way of overcoming them or adapting to the disability. A neuropathy or Parkinsonism, where a walker can help someone move around at home and stay stable, is effectively a better situation for assistive technology to make a difference than, say, someone that has had a stroke and lost the function in half of their body. A greater disability and less room for assisted technology to make up the gap. Living arrangements. Someone that lives on a single-floor house and does not involve stairs or a garage or a long and steep driveway is likely to adapt better to this living environment with assisted technology than, say, a 3-floor house or a house that has a lot of clutter, complicated furniture. There are technologies that can now, chairlifts that can take people upstairs, or ways that they can communicate with people in different rooms using the grown-up equivalent of baby monitors, if you will, intercom systems and sensors. Nonetheless, the better the living arrangement, the simpler it is to navigate, the more effective assisted technology would be. Care needs, obviously. Someone that just needs to move around and is impaired in mobility alone is going to do better with a little technology than someone that needs help with their basic activities of daily living, be it showering, eating, grooming, using the bathroom, etc. And of course, personal motivations and preferences. If someone doesn't want to use a walker, they're not going to use a walker, no matter how intuitive it is, and no matter how clearly it's going to make a difference. Some people want to walk on their own 2 feet. This is the only thing that matters, and no amount of technology is going to change that. This must be respected, which is why much of the assisted technology is designed to improve autonomy or minimize the dependence on the technology itself. This was a different study that looked at the same question, and they looked at more subjective factors rather than opinion. And The predictors of assisted technology device use, not successful use, but likelihood to be referred to some sort of assisted technology. Older age, a higher perceived need. So visual impairment, for example, which is quite disabling in and of its own right, and without some assistance can completely impede autonomy, was something that a lot of people felt was a driver of their willingness to accept technology. A lot of glasses in the audience, including my own. It makes sense, doesn't it? Without this, we wouldn't be able to see, and that would be a problem. A better fit with the environment. Embarrassment. Some people did not want to use apps like reminders and messages or queuing mechanisms. Some people take pride in being able to have their 15 bottles of pills and being able to know exactly what they're using. Even a pill box is a source of a little embarrassment. Knowledge on how to use technology. The onus for this often falls on care providers or their caregivers. Is this person well educated? Do they know how to use this technology in a safe manner? If there is an emergency and they have a little beeper, do they know exactly what button to press and what's going to happen after that? If it sets off an alarm, is it going to cause panic? Education matters. Obviously, increased safety and efficiency. Maintenance of autonomy. If using a walker is what it's going to take to stay at home versus having to live in a different environment or even have someone else come and live with them, people are much likelier to use the walker. And finally, security. This is a big one, does not merit a detailed explanation. It's quite obvious. There's cool terms for everything these days. Domotics is a new study of the information and communication technology applications in the residential structure or environment, providing the context for ambient assisted living. The domo comes from the root term of domicile or domiciliary. It's the study of technology in the domiciliary environment. How can you make this technology part of their ambience so that it's not intrusive but built into where they live? And the product of Domotics study is the creation of smart homes, which is a residence equipped with technology that facilitates monitoring of residents with the aim of improving quality of life and well-being. And it's based on smart technology. So what's smart technology? Loosely defined as any electronic system that could be sensors, processors, devices that create an integrated system. So they work with each other and through a centralized network, capable of monitoring and supporting individuals in real time. So to sum it all up, smart technology in a home environment is a smart home, and the study of smart home design is domotics. Now, nothing is ever simple. This was some work from the social and ethnographic researchers that identified exactly how older adults do decision-making with relation to smart technology. Older adults are much more deliberate. You introduce technology, the first question is, do I even perform the activity that this technology helps? If not, there's no need for smart technology. If so, am I satisfied with my performance on this technology, on this activity? Yes, no need for smart technology. If not, then could smart technology really help me perform this activity? If not, no need for it. If yes, then they will use the smart technology. But there's all sorts of other themes that they must then answer. There's barrier themes. Is this technology practical? Is it easy? Is it reliable? Frequently, is it affordable? And then facilitator themes. Does it help autonomy? Is this something I can't do? Does it add safety? Older adults work on a more systematic approach. It's usually the secret to their success. There's a methodology to how they make their decisions, informed by experience, informed by lessons learned. And this plays into how they use technology. It's not a coincidence that technology use among the older population has increased as the technology itself has become simpler, more intuitive, less expensive, and more useful. These are two examples of smart homes. This is the Georgia Tech Aware Home. It's a two-story house on the Georgia Tech campus in Atlanta. It's designed to be a smart home prototype. This house is equipped with sensors. It's equipped with technology that takes people up and down stairs. And they actually have people live there and assess the living environment while they're in there to see how smart home technology can evolve. This is the MIT Place Lab in Boston. It says something about the difference between Boston and Atlanta, that they had a 2-story house in Atlanta and a 1-bedroom condo in Boston. But this is a diagram of the schematic of the kitchen in this condo. Looks like any other kitchen. There's a sound subwoofer at the bottom, temperature sensors, switches to detect whether the drawer is open or closed, infrared illuminators so that if the light outside is dark, then it will illuminate automatically. Top counter cameras so that people don't have to bend over. There's a screen where they can see what's cooking. It makes sure that stoves won't be left on accidentally. Humidity and temperature sensors, optimal carbon dioxide sensors. When I do clinical assessments in my patients, I tend to ask if there's been anything they would consider a safety risk. A stove left on, an oven left on, a knife drawer left open. In the MIT Place Lab, the kitchen does this work for you. One less thing to worry about. This is not exclusively American. The European Union has been funding much broader projects that actually involve collaborations between countries to implement this technology on a society-wide level. The Enable and the Hope projects are two examples, looking at how to create homes that also fit certain cultural paradigms, because people have certain expectations of how their kitchens are to be designed, what goes where and what is to be used, how specific uses for certain rooms. And they're looking at integrating smart technology in a way that can be disseminated to the entire population with relative simplicity. Quite remarkable. And this is my favorite. This is, if someone is Dutch here, please forgive my massacre of the pronunciation, but as I understood it, it's the Hogewijk. The Hogewijk is a facility in the Netherlands. It's a residential care facility for dementia. From the outside, it looks like a fortress. From the inside, it looks like this. It was designed to create a sense of familiarity for the people that live there. For those that have been to Europe, this could have been a picture of any plaza in any residential neighborhood in any average European city. They even built fake garages. They built sidewalk cafes, trees. The architecture reflects the architecture of the city, not the architecture of a facility per se. There's a fake bus stop and a fake supermarket where people can actually go and purchase what they think they need. What this allows is it allows them to have a routine that reflects the routine they had before they were moved into the facility. There's an economics system that's built in. And the most remarkable, they have specific types of home designs pre-created, and they hired several designers to create these living environments. There is a Indonesian type of living quarters because the Netherlands has a large Indonesian population. There is a Christian living environment for people that believe in their faith, that has faith elements built into the design. There is the affluent living environment, which reflects certain suburbs of Amsterdam and parts of the city where antique furniture, crystal chandeliers, things that people would have grown up with or lived with. All of this is designed to create an environment where people feel comfortable, where they feel not monitored or not out of their environment, and where there's some element of familiarity, which in turn has been shown to reduce incidents of agitation, of violence. It's shown to predict better participation. There is one caveat to all of this smart home technology, though. Data do not yet exist showing that these are cost-effective. And though intuitively it makes sense, we don't know how this translates into real-world outcomes. Just because it's designed to reduce safety issues doesn't necessarily mean that it does. And the data don't yet exist. So this is exciting, it's cool, but it must also be consumed with caution. And finally, what are we doing in the healthcare industry to sort of utilize the power of some of this technology? What are we doing to use its versatility? And in this section, I'm going to discuss some studies that I've been involved with personally. These are only representative of the broader work here, and by no means the final word on this matter, though I kind of wish it was. So the case for technology-based health interventions in older adults. 5% of Americans spend 50% of all healthcare expenses. And the top 1% alone are responsible for 20% of this healthcare expenses. The terminology that became popular last year, the 1% and the 99%, turns out it's not just socioeconomic status. The percentages also apply to healthcare expenditure. The majority of this 1% were older adults with multiple chronic conditions, including but not limited to diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, asthma, arthritis, and dementia. Something needs to be done. This is a study where we used telemedicine and teletechnology, which I alluded to earlier. The title of the study was Telepsychiatry for Neuropsychological Testing of Rural-Dwelling Latinos. Now, we all know that dementia is a rapidly growing problem with a need for accurate diagnosis and early treatment. In rural areas, patients may have limited access to specialized services, such as neuropsychological testing, which is really the bedrock of diagnostics these days. The imaging exists, but it's usually prohibitively expensive and not covered by insurance anyway. In rural areas, especially in California, growing numbers of Latino patients may have limited access to such resources, especially if they are monolingual Spanish speakers. And telepsychiatry may offer a solution by providing access to care and testing for these patients in remote areas. And based on this, we picked El Centro, California as the site for our study. Now, if you wanted to identify a site with multiple disadvantages, really El Centro is a crucible for every psychosocial stressor you can imagine. The highest unemployment rate in the country, 70% of the population is Latino, almost half live below the poverty line, much lower than average annual household income and levels of education. This has been in the news for a while in publications no less distinguished than The Economist and the New York Times. So this is an area with major challenges and major needs. We collaborated with a private clinic, the Sun Valley Behavioral Research and the Research Center in El Centro, to do a study of telemedicine and whether this would help identify dementia. So the protocol was something like this. People were randomized to get either the telemedicine testing or the in-person testing first. For telemedicine, the subject was in El Centro at Sun Valley. The rater was in UCSD, not far from here. There was a research assistant that oriented the patient to the equipment that would be used, and they would establish the online connection, and they would be present in the room peripherally during testing, which was conducted in real time. The research assistant would collect material at the end of the test, and then they would administer a scale called the Patient Assessment of Communication during telemedicine to see how the patient thought the interaction went. 2 weeks later, they had in-person testing, or it could go be the other way around if they were randomized to get in-person first. In this case, both the subject and the rater were in El Centro. We had our people drive out there. The research assistant would still orient the patient to the process to keep it comparable. They would still be present in the room peripherally. The testing was conducted face-to-face. And at the end, the research assistant collected the material. We also videotaped the in-person encounters. Because to make the conditions comparable, we wanted some technology involved. But also, it allowed us to then compare the two modalities neutrally. And this was kind of how it looked. These are not actual patients. These were my research assistants. The picture was taken in our room at San Diego. On the TV screen was the research assistant in El Centro. It was set up so we could see the person at the other end, but there was also a screen that showed us what the other person was seeing. And it was live communication using a pretty sophisticated technology setup. There was a camera, microphone, and speaker system here. The camera could move and follow the person if they moved around with this remote control. We also had a scanner set in, so if you wanted to show someone a picture and have them identify it, it's a little overexposed, but you can see a little bit of the comb binding of the book of pictures. And you could switch the screen so that this person then only saw the scanner. If you see here, the book had a picture of a stethoscope, and the person at the other end saw this picture because you would switch modes. And that's how you could show them pictures, and you could do a fairly sophisticated test battery. We administered 6 standardized neuropsychological tests in Spanish. We've just submitted our findings for review. We found neuropsychological testing using telemedicine was feasible. There were no substantial differences in the test scores between in-person and teletesting. And we determined that this was a potentially viable solution for providing this clinical service in rural areas with no specialized neuropsychologists. Imperial County does not have this service. It does not, in fact, even have psychiatry beds. If you were living in Imperial County and needed psychiatric hospitalization, you would have to drive to either eastern San Diego County or Yuma, Arizona. So this study is a good example of how use of technology can translate into a real-world clinical service. We also did a study using XAR Games, where we used the Nintendo Wii. This was one of my favorite professional periods ever because I spent 3 months coming in and playing video games every day from morning to evening, and it was work. It was great. We looked to see if XAR Games could target subsyndromal depression in older adults. Subsyndromal depression is 3 to 5 times more common than major depression and has a significant impact on both functioning as well as quality of life. The effectiveness of pharmacologic treatment has always been questionable. Medications don't seem to work. Physical activity and exercise, on the other hand, has been shown to help with depression. Older adults, however, tend to have poor adherence to exercise-based treatment, especially if it's not supervised. To clarify, subsyndromal depression represents the presence of depressive symptoms that are not severe enough to meet criteria for major depressive disorder. So what we did was we used the Nintendo Wii. We used the basic sport exercise package that comes when you purchase the Wii gaming system. Our kinesiology colleagues at the CalIT 2 on UCSD, they collaborated with us for this, and we found literature from research done elsewhere that showed that you burn about 50% of the calories playing a sport on the Wii compared to what you would playing the same sport in real life. In other words, half hour of tennis using the Wii burns about half the calories of half hour of actual tennis. Not bad. We had an exercise professional teach our older adults how to warm up and cool down. We recruited 27 older adults with subsyndromal depression from community centers around San Diego. We set up the Wii at each of these centers, and all we did was we had these older adults play Wii sports, any sport of their choice. They had tennis, bowling, golf, boxing, and I'm forgetting one. Doesn't matter. They would play any game of their choice for about half hour. We would supervise them. Because we wanted to study the effect of the game and not the social interaction, people weren't allowed to play the Wii with other people. They had to play one-on-one against the computer. This is not how most people use this in real life. Why the Wii? Because they could use the sport in a closed environment. We secured the living area, so you see no wires, you see no tables, no chairs. We created an open space to minimize the chances of someone tripping. We got these cool foam connectors to the Wiimote, so it looks a little like a tennis racket. We focused on the intrinsic motivation of these games. Anyone play the Wii in the audience? A few people. You know how you get the bright gold star when you outdo your own score? That doesn't actually happen when you go to the gym or if you play tennis. There's no gold star. There's no jumping figures when you outperform yourself. There's no high scores. Doing it on the Wii, the game is designed to keep people motivated to continue playing and outdo themselves. There may be a social effect. We tried to control for it as best as possible. But the findings were quite staggering. So the QIDS is the quick inventory of depressive symptoms, and a higher score indicates more depression. And we found that from baseline to 6 weeks, there was quite a significant fall in their depression severity. And this was both clinically and statistically significant. And this decrease was maintained from 6 to 12 weeks. We went back at 24 weeks, and we found that of the 27 original subjects, 22 were continuing to play the Wii, which is more than can be said if you were to say give someone a 6-month gym membership. how many of them would still be playing it 3 times or going to the gym 3 times a week? My guess is not too many, though admittedly I haven't seen the data. And this is an ongoing study now, looking at iPads for the control of behavioral symptoms in older psychiatric inpatients. This is a study we're conducting on the Senior Behavioral Health Inpatient Unit at the Hillcrest Medical Center. We recruit inpatients who are, by virtue of the fact that they're hospitalized, some of the most impaired patients in the community. Most of them have a history of behavioral symptoms like agitation and fairly severe dementia. Patients with behavioral symptoms frequently require psychotropic medications, like antipsychotics. This is a big issue because all antipsychotic medications actually come with black box warnings for use in people with dementia. They can increase the risk of both stroke and sudden death. Yet, the agitation is so severe that it poses a more immediate threat to their well-being than a potential side effect from these medications. So on the one hand, use of these medications is going up. They're expensive, they're not safe, but they're the best we've got. Now, based on an observation that it seems everyone has had, where say you take a 4-year-old to a restaurant and this child is bouncing off the walls, and suddenly you give him an iPhone, and he's quiet, and you can enjoy your meal. This actually happened to me. It made us think about if this can have an effect like this in a 4-year-old, can it have a similar or equivalent effect in someone that's functioning at approximately the level of a 4-year-old? So we got some iPads from the, thanks to the UCSD Resident Physician Council's iPad project. We consented patients, well actually we consented their caregivers. All patients are trained in iPad use by my study staff, a couple of whom are in this room at the back. We developed a menu of approximately 70 apps. Unfortunately, we were restricted to only those available commercially and for free on the App Store. This is not a funded study, so we had to make do with what we had. There's ads on that distract patients and they don't like it, but we'll see. We teach these patients how to use the iPads, and then when they become agitated, we give the iPads to the patients. The research assistants are with them when they use it as required by the IRB. And our outcome measure is if we can achieve a reduction in the use of these elective psychotropic medications. We put quite a bit of time into customizing the apps for each patient. So we have a list of what they like, what they don't like. And we like to use simple apps. This is one example of an app called Pond. You touch the screen, it ripples, there's koi fish, there's a frog, and it's like interacting with a pond surface. And then there's things you can do. There's you can buy tokens and you can breed your own koi, and the more sophisticated patients play with this, the less sophisticated and more cognitively impaired patients just play with it like they were sitting on a pond. Really quite remarkable. Another favorite is the Pottery App, where you have a virtual pot and you use your fingers to spin it. And it will then let you fire it and you get your nice virtual pot with a pattern. Matter of time before they tie in with a real potter who will make a pot and send it to you. Hasn't happened yet, though. And this study is ongoing, so I'm not prepared to present more comprehensive data, but I did want to present the findings from our first 2 patients. This is with their permission. The first patient was an 82-year-old Caucasian female diagnosed with dementia. She had a MoCA, or Montreal Cognitive Assessment score of 8 out of 30. The normal cutoff is 26. So this is someone with a very high degree of, a very advanced degree of dementia. The blue dots represent when we used medications, and the red dots represent iPad use. So here we have the days of admission, and here we have the time of the day. Before we started using the iPad, she needed PRN medications twice. This was day 1, where we gave her quite an intensive education in iPad use. And if you see, after that, over the next week, she needed only 3 PRNs. Not coincidentally, these were during Saturday and Sunday when my research assistants were actually not on the unit and we couldn't use the iPads with them. On the only day when she used the iPads and needed medication, the meds were actually given earlier in the day. After we started using the iPad that day, she needed no PRNs for the remainder of her stay on the unit. I only hope all my other patients are this clean. The second patient, more complex. This was a 91-year-old Caucasian female with severe Alzheimer's disease and a MoCA score of 8 out of 25, not 30. And this is because she could not even complete the 5 visual executive functioning tasks that involved using a pen. This patient was enrolled in the study when she had already been with us for almost 4 weeks. And this was someone that was getting several medications to calm down her agitation. We were very cautious in how we used the iPad with her. We started very slowly, needed a lot of supervision. But if you look at the scatter of medication frequency, after the iPad use becomes more frequent, in this, the second half of her stay, she needed fewer medications. Now, this is admittedly unprocessed data. There's confounds. Was it in fact the iPad, or was it that we were making other medication changes that calmed her down? Were there other medical conditions that were treated? In this slide, I'm not able to tease out some of these effects. So it's based only on sort of circumstantial evidence, if you will, though we are collecting all of these data, and we hope to have it ready to analyze by later in the fall. This is a study, as I mentioned, that's moving a little bit in fits and starts. So to summarize, what does all of this mean? Safe to say, technology use is becoming ubiquitous and impacts older adults in a multitude of ways. Internet use continues to rise, especially social media use. In contrast to younger adults, older adults tend to use technology and the internet in a goal-directed rather than exploratory manner. With the growth of the aging in place movement, smart technology interventions are likely to play a big role in helping older adults continue to remain in their home environments. There's an urgent need for efficacy, safety, and cost-effectiveness data. It's a little bit of the Wild West out there right now, driven entirely by marketing. The new wave of studies indicate a role for communication and other commercial technology for health research, data collection, providing services, and innovative non-pharmacologic interventions for several conditions. Before I finish, I must acknowledge several people that have helped with the research work, but also assembling some of these ideas. The column on the left are my research assistants. Tammy Lam, who actually helped assemble this talk and is in the audience today. Cheng, Stephen, Sarah, Alok, Jennifer, Elizabeth, and Omid, who I'm proud to say worked for free. It's amazing what a student will do for a nice letter and a publication. But I'm extremely proud of them, because even in the year that they've worked with me, they're all now published scientific authors. Omid actually got into med school. The nursing staff on the senior behavioral health unit, who makes it possible to conduct a study like the iPad study. My mentors, colleagues, and friends at the Stein Institute, and especially Maya, who made it possible to do this talk, Sandy Dorsey, and my mentors, Colin Depp, Dan Sewell, and Dilip Jeste. Thank you.